And I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Ashley Brittner Wells. I use she, her pronouns. I do community engagement for the Our Missoula project. I'm so excited to see all of you here tonight. This is so exciting. Yes, it is an exciting, I don't know if you saw the celebratory graphic. We're really excited to have a draft land use plan after a 2-year process that has been incredible. And we wanted to kick things off with a word from City Council member Mike Nugent. He's the chair of our Land Use and Planning Committee. And just to kind of get us started, and then we'll pass it to our senior planner, Emily Gluckin, to take us through some information. So Mike, please join me.
All right, we just wanted to, on behalf of the elected officials, I guess, in Missoula, I bring greetings from the mayor and city council. Take a moment and thank everybody for participating and coming tonight, and also for all the participation people have done throughout the almost 2 years now we've been working on this, which is exciting. I mean, sometimes I think I nerd out a little bit, but I can't tell you how excited I am that we are at this point and we have a plan for people to be commenting on. And I really hope that not only, obviously, you all are coming and taking some of your time to be part of this, but you tell your friends and people you work with in the community to, go to the website, use the easy to use, easy to navigate tool and comment as well, because this really is community driven. And at the end of this process, not only are we going to have a great plan, but we are going to then shift into having a great code that is very much driven by the residents and the users in Missoula who this impacts every day. And I think that's exciting, not only in Montana, but in the region. So again, this is something that we at council and the mayor as well really value and appreciate. And I don't think anybody wants to hear from me anymore. So thank you again for taking time out of your evening to be here. And I'm going to throw it over to Emily.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Emily Gluckin. I am a senior planner on the long-range planning team of the City of Missoula. And I'll have Laval go to our next slide because we are here to celebrate. We have a plan and we're really excited to share it with you guys. This is a huge milestone, years in the making, and we're really excited to share with you all what we've got and hear what you think about it. I am gonna be talking at you for a little bit. We have about 20 minutes of information and then a break for questions. So I'll just ask if you have any questions come up about what I'm talking about. Hold it, we'll have a space for that. And then the second half of the presentation, we will get into the meat of the plan. So know that that's coming forward. Next slide. So just a little overview of what we're gonna be talking about. I really just wanna give you the who, what, where, when, why of this plan, and set you up so that you can explore the plan and know what's in it, know how to navigate it, have an understanding of why we did this, and feel well set up to share your thoughts with us. So let's dive in. What are we talking about today? I'm just going to move this forward so I can see the screen. Okay, that's better. Yeah, I'll have you go to the next slide, Laval. So starting off with where we are talking about, the land use plan area covers about 40,000 acres. Approximately 56% of this area is within city limits, and then the remaining 44% is covers land that's in the county, and that's mostly land that's kind of surrounding the city limits in a buffer on the urban fringe. This area stretches east to Missoula and includes a portion of, stretches east to East Missoula and includes a portion of Bonner. And then it stretches west to include the Y intersection of Highway 93 and includes portions of Grant Creek, Rattlesnake Creek drainages, and then the South Hills and portions of Miller Creek. Just starting off with, what is a land use plan? What are we talking about today? A land use plan is the foundational document that cities in Montana, so this is not just a Missoula document, cities in Montana use to highlight community priorities for future growth and put in place long-term land use strategies that aim to address the city's emerging issues and challenges. And it forms the basis for our future zoning and development decisions. As Mike said, we have the next phase of this is making a development code. So this is really the foundation for what that will look like. It outlines our vision for how the community can meet our current needs and desires while also planning ahead for changes to economic growth, help us protect our environment as we grow as a city, and accurately project what infrastructure needs we'll have as we grow as a city. And then it also guides the form, mobility, and intensity of land use across the community, and that's an idea that I'll talk about a little bit more later in this presentation. I want to note here that this land use plan is going to look different and play a little bit different of a role than what our current growth policy does. In our current approach, the growth policy has served as, we kind of call it the North Star for city policies, and it's acted as an umbrella for many other city policies over the last decade or so. In our new approach that we're transitioning to with this draft land use plan, this plan will be more targeted and will focus more specifically on land use planning alone. It will be adopted at a level that's consistent with other similar city policies rather than acting as that umbrella. And I also just want to note that our current growth policy has a number of issue plans and area plans that are currently related to it. And through this process, we'll be bringing over the relevant components of those existing plans as they relate to land use and this updated vision of growth that we're going to be talking about today. And I just want to kind of do some value setting early in the presentation. So we believe that to achieve a healthy community and environment, we must increase housing availability and access at all levels in all neighborhoods, advance resiliency and adaptability, emphasize connectivity, and support preservation and protection of sensitive natural areas, including clean air, waterways, and green spaces. And on top of that, our city streets and rights-of-way must also be accessible, supportive of different modes of transportation, attractive, and most importantly, safe. We believe that a vision for the community, that is what this land use plan is intended to be, must come from the community and must be built on a foundation of extensive and inclusive community engagement. And that's really been our goal throughout this project, is to build that really strong foundation of community understanding, community values, community visioning, and build our land use plan from that. And I mention this here because the themes and the goals of the policy that we'll talk about a little bit later reflect all of these values. And then the land use plan also includes a land use strategy that establishes the approach to achieving accessible, walkable, and vibrant streets and neighborhoods, while also meeting our housing needs. The land use strategy confirms and clarifies the city's growth strategy for Focus Inward. That might be a term that sounds familiar. That's a concept that we talk about in our current growth policy, and we're bringing it forward in this one and kind of expanding on it by placing a greater emphasis on both equity and community form. And we do this by considering the close relationship between the types of built environments that exist within the community. These are place types. Remember that word. We'll be talking about it later. And the transportation networks that serve them, which are the street types. So getting into the why. Why did we do this update, and what were the factors that went into this plan? And I'm going to start kind of back in time with our next slide. So for some background and some brief history of planning at the City of Missoula, we've been leading up to this update for quite some time. Our current zoning code, which is Title 20, was adopted about 15 years ago. And our current growth policy that we operate under today was adopted almost a decade ago. In 2019, city planning staff performed a 5-year review of the growth policy, and in that review, we identified the need to update our current growth policy to make it more current. That led us to the Missoula project being initiated and ultimately kicked off in 2022. And about a year into the project, the state passed the Montana Land Use Planning Act, which gave us new impetus and mostly a legal requirement to update our land use policy. If you've been to our past presentations, you've probably seen this slide a million times, but I bring it up to illustrate that since our current growth policy was adopted in 2015, we have had a large number of plans and policies and goals that have been passed by the city, and things that cover long-range transportation and housing policy and climate resiliency and equity goals. It's important that with the land use plan that we're operating under, it reflects these newer city goals and newer community goals. While much of what's expressed in the current growth policy is still very relevant today, there are issues and challenges and things that the city has actively been addressing that are not adequately captured in our current growth policy. So part of the reason for this update is to really get that all in one place and make sure that our operating land use policy reflects everything we're trying to achieve as a community. So a little bit about the Montana Land Use Planning Act. This is really one big reason for the creation of our new land use plan is that we are legally required to do so. The Planning Act was passed in 2023 by the state legislature, and it requires larger cities in Montana to comprehensively update their land use plans, zoning regulations, and subdivision regulations. We were fortunately already in motion in terms of updating our growth policy. So this provided us with some more specific parameters to follow and a little bit more guidance of what to put in it and how to update our plan to meet those needs. This comes with a set of a few things that we need to take into consideration as we're updating our land use plan. So the first is that this act calls for a commitment to continuous public involvement through the adoption of a public participation plan and then through the execution of that public participation plan. And the major shift that this brings is an emphasis on engagement during a broader planning process, such as updating the land use plan, subsequently updating our zoning code, rather than during site-specific development projects, which is kind of our standard that we're used to today. Earlier this summer, we transitioned the planning board to a planning commission. This is a requirement of the state bill too. And that planning commission will review and provide recommendations to city council that will establish a compliant land use plan, maps, zoning and subdivision regulations. And they will also serve or function as an appellant body for any administrative site-specific land use decisions. So pretty similar to how our planning board exists today, with a little bit of shift in their what their role is. I will talk about the updated land use plan and map in the next slide, but this is the big reason why we're here today, that we have to do this. And then following the update of our land use plan, we need to update our zoning code and our map to be aligned with the new vision that we establish. And something interesting and notable to point out is that with these zoning updates, they need to include at least 5 zoning reforms that promote housing. So there's a menu of, I think, 14 items. We pick 5 as a city and establish those in our zoning code. And then finally, we will update the city's subdivision regulations to also comply with the land use plan that we adopt and our new zoning code. So zooming in a little bit on what is required to update our land use plan and our future land use map. This land use plan, these notes are not correct, but really, so first and foremost, we need to update our land use plan to align with kind of more modern visions. We need to update our land use map to meet those modern visions. And then while doing so, the state requires us to do a number of analyses and projections of our population growth, our housing need by looking at our housing inventory, an analysis of the local services that we have, the economic development needs or projected growth there, what natural resources exist and what hazards exist so that we can accurately identify constraints to growth. Yeah, something, that's right. So of those analyses that we had to do, these are kind of the big highlights. So the current population of the land use plan area is just under 94,000 right now, and it's expected to grow at a cumulative annual growth rate of 1.39% to reach a population of just over 128,000 by 2045. So that means, and we're expected to have an additional 37,000 people added to the area over the next 20 years. And for as of right now, for every 100 people that live within the land use plan area, there have historically been 61 to 63 people employed within the area. So currently we have 63 employees for every 100 people in the workforce, and the land use plan area is expected to see an approximate increase to about 85,000 employees by 2045. Which will add an additional 28,000 new employees to the workforce over the next 20 years. And many of these workers who aren't working from home but working in person will need to be accommodated for in commercial buildings or, businesses to work for. And then with this increase in population, the land use plan area needs to see, according to our analyses, between 22,000 and 27,500 total housing units to be built by 2045 to meet this population demand and reach a healthy vacancy rate, which we consider to be between 5 and 8%. According to our analyses, this area is currently facing a deficit of 2,700 to 3,700 housing units. So combining that deficit with this population growth, the community should build between 1,100 and 1,500 new homes per year until a stable housing market is reached. And then after that, setting a yearly target to produce between 900 and 1,100 homes per year throughout this 20-year time frame. So lots of housing that needs to be added. And as we're looking at housing need, we also need to look at housing capacity. Ideally, the city would have a housing capacity that is 3 to 4 times our housing need. And the reason behind this is that even if a type of housing is allowed on the ground in theory, it might not happen in reality. We can't, guarantee that every property that allows a house will build that unit. So by having more capacity than what is needed, the market can be resilient to these challenges and help us meet that housing need kind of naturally. And then this slide might look familiar to some of you too. This is from our equity and land use report that we did last year. And this analysis is a big influence on the land use policy that we're sharing with you today, and will continue to influence our code changes that we'll explore later this year. This was really an analysis to help us understand how our policies and regulations impact equity in our community. And as a spoiler, if you haven't read it, we found that our land use and especially our zoning contributes to inequities. So we have some issues to resolve. And most notably, this analysis showed us that over 2/3 of land in the city is zoned to allow housing types that only less than 1/3 of Missoulians can afford to live in. And this analysis also provided us with 6 principles for advancing equity through land use. These include things like distributing opportunities for housing, for affordable housing types across the city, increasing access to opportunity throughout the city, focusing on form. This is a big theme of our land use plan. And these principles really were considered heavily in the process of creating this draft land use plan, and they form a strong basis for our land use policy and our land use strategy. And they'll continue to be considered as we move into our code updates as well later next year. So how did we get here? A little bit about the process. In our past presentations, we've talked about how the overall land use process and how all of these pieces fit together. And I just want to note that over the past several years, we've collaborated with the community to really focus on that first box there, which is visioning, and understand what our collective community vision for growth is. Right now, we are formalizing that vision into a policy and a future land use map. So we're really in stage 2 and 3 here. And once adopted, these documents will set the policy basis and direction for zoning map changes, zoning regulation changes, and then eventually it will influence the development that we see on the ground. The Missoula process itself was broken up into 6 phases. We started with a community launch, which was really helping the community understand this project, understand what we were doing and why we're doing it, and get used to the concepts that we would be talking about with you all for the next several years. Phase 2 focused on defining the problem, and this means really understanding the foundation of what is the issue that we're trying to solve, how are our current operating policies not meeting the needs that we have as a community, and kind of where are these shortfalls. And then scenario 3 looked at, okay, we understand that problem, what are some solutions for getting us there? So that's when we looked at a few different options for scenarios, and eventually all of that was funneled into what we're sharing with you today. So this has really been an iterative process. We've been building on what we learn as we go, and our goal today is to really have a culmination of these 4 steps. And this is to say that while this is a huge milestone and kind of brings us close to the end of our land use plan process, this is not the end of the Missoula project, because we will have code updates to follow, the adoption of a unified development code to follow, and you will still be hearing from us for more time to come. So within each of those phases, we had engagement cycles, and these events, again, were iterative and helped us build up to the point that we're at now. Our public outreach really began as we kicked off the project, and this was in partnership with Common Good Missoula. It was a really cool event that featured storytelling and a lot of educational components to help people understand just what is our Missoula project and why are we doing it. We focused heavily for the bulk of last year on speaking with community members about their experience with the equity issues that we were looking at in the equity and land use report, and their experiences with housing affordability and segregation and gentrification, and got a lot of qualitative data to supplement our quantitative data from that phase. And then, or I should say first, the community growth policy workshops were really when we started talking about our visioning with the community, and got a better understanding of what is most important to people to have in their neighborhoods, either as it exists now or what they would like to see in the future. And then in spring and summer of 2024, this is when we started to get more specific about what could change look like and what could some solutions look like to the problems that we're talking about. So we started with an activity that explored community preferences around housing diversity in our residential neighborhoods, and then we used that to inform that menu of scenarios that we shared with the community at open houses over the summer. And then that brings us to today, where we're discussing the draft land use plan to you all. And then the final engagement cycle in this land use plan process will include public hearings before planning board and before city council during the plan's hopeful adoption process. And just some snapshots of who we've talked to and how many people we've reached, our engagement and outreach was not limited to the main public events. So in addition to 12 kind of big community-wide events that we held, we have attended over 100 stakeholder meetings or events. We've presented to city boards, committees, or council 18 times. And we've held 14 community advisory group meetings over the life of the project. And in total, we've connected with over 3,000 community members over the last 2 years, and hope to keep growing that number over the next few months too. Thank you. So with all of those people that we've talked to and all of those events that we've held and conversations that we've had, we've compiled thousands of comments and pulled out the major themes. And there were definitely some themes that consistently kept rising in each conversation. These, I won't go through the whole list, but, well, maybe I will, but the major ones are creating complete neighborhoods, so a desire to be able to walk to things in your neighborhood, access a coffee shop, access services near where you live. A lot of housing themes. Obviously, this is an urgent need for all of us and on everyone's mind, so promoting affordable and diverse housing options through the city, and with that, supporting incentives for affordable and accessible housing. Climate goals came up consistently, so how can we align what we're doing on our land use plan and our codes with supporting our climate and sustainability goals as a city? Missoula is in a kind of unique natural setting, so there's a desire to preserve the open spaces that we love to recreate in, our agricultural areas that surround the city, and our environmentally sensitive areas, and keep those safe. Again, being able to walk to things in your neighborhood and having multimodal options. Social connections was one that came up a lot, and especially having spaces to, in our built environment, have those social or opportunities to connect with your neighbors and have conversations and kind of form that social infrastructure in your neighborhood too. Character and sense of place, super important themes that came up. So how can we preserve what we have, encourage adaptive reuse of buildings, and further our historic character in our neighborhoods? Lots of concerns about the impacts of density on that community character and infrastructure, so consideration of that is important. And then finally, how can we make sure our planning efforts are inclusive and equitable and hear from all the right voices? So all of our engagement and all of our kind of previous analysis that I talked about in the previous section led us to the creation of 3 scenarios that we workshopped with the community back in July. And we had an amazing turnout between 2 in-person workshops and 1 online workshop. I think we had over 200 or 300 responses, which was amazing in the middle of July. But the way it worked is we presented 3 scenario options, but we didn't necessarily ask you to pick is 1, 2, or 3 your favorite. We asked survey questions that got more towards what's your preference over different types of trade-offs or different things that you would be comfortable with seeing in your community. And what we heard was an overwhelming support, especially for the housing-related scenarios that would offer the highest degree of change for the community. So from the responses, we heard about these preferences around growth and preferences around trade-offs. We identified the direction for a preferred scenario for growth, and some big ideas came out of this preferred scenario. These include encouraging more housing in mixed-use areas to allow more people to live in proximity to their daily needs, transit services, and to create more opportunities for affordable housing types within those areas. There's a ghost in here or something. Equitably distributing housing options across all neighborhoods by increasing opportunities for housing supply, smaller and more affordable homes, and homes that are compatible with existing neighborhoods, and especially increasing these opportunities for housing in areas that have good connectivity to services and amenities and kind of transportation systems nearby. And then allowing small-scale commercial services in more residential neighborhoods. So think things like coffee shops, corner stores, bodegas, grocery shops, things like that. One other thing to note is that this preferred scenario does not recommend fully eliminating parking requirements across the board, but regulating parking in a way that balances our housing goals with our other city goals. So continuing to look at how we can regulate parking in a considerate way. So all of these components between the analysis, the community feedback that we received, our preferred scenario, were woven together and balanced to create a basis for the land use plan and land use map. And this is where we are today with a draft document that has our policy in it and a draft map that kind of tells us geographically what that looks like. Okay, let's dive in. The moment we've been waiting for. What is in our plan? So maybe a disclaimer, I'm gonna be keeping this as a pretty high level overview of just the key section of the plan and the key things that I want you all to know, and encourage you all to dig deeper after the presentation, ask us questions. We're having a number of drop-in events after this. We're having another presentation, and are just generally available to keep talking about this with you. But the purpose of what we're going to go through now is just to kind of give you the highlights and the snapshot of what we're talking about. And I just wanted to add that this is ultimately a plan for the community that we want the community to use. So it's really important that we help you understand how to navigate that and know what to look for. Oh my gosh. So today we'll be focusing, can you see how big my notes are? That's ridiculous. We'll be focusing on the land use policy part of the code and the land use strategy part of the code. The land use policy themes chapter describes 6 land use policy themes. Each theme has an introduction to the overarching goal of that theme. It has policy objectives that address the key issues identified in each theme. And then each of the themes concludes with implementation guidance that consolidates the actions needed to implement the theme. And these are further described in the land use implementation chapter. And then the land use strategy chapter introduces the city's strategies for applying these themes and policies kind of on a geographic level. It consists of descriptions of these designations, and we split that in between place types and street types. And just as a little highlight for what that means, place types describe geographic areas with a unique combination of land use, built form, mobility, and intensity. And street types include information on the design objectives, typical treatments, mode priority, functionality, target metrics, and also shares the place types that they relate to. And then the place type and street type maps show where each of these types are designated geographically throughout the land use plan area. I'll show you those as we're going through this presentation, but I also want to point out we have printouts of those that I encourage you all to look at while you're here. And then the land use plan adoption and amendments chapter provides information regarding how and why the land use plan was adopted and how it, as well as related issue and area plans, will be amended and adopted in the future. And then we have a land use implementation chapter, Laval mentioned this before, that includes the list of identified actions related to each theme along with their expected timelines. And then this chapter also addresses coordination between the land use plan and the city's community investment program, or CIP. You might have heard that term before. And then implementation monitoring practices. So that's our kind of tour of the table of contents when we'll get into the themes. So these are the 6 themes that form the basis for the land use policy. Starting with focus inward, as I mentioned before, this is a concept that we're bringing forward from our previous growth policy, and it's a concept that our growth policy or current growth policy is really formulated around. And in this land use plan, we expand upon it, we give it its own theme chapter, and designated that with the goal of focusing compact development and infill within the urban area to minimize strain on infrastructure and prevent sprawl into sensitive and constrained lands. Our other themes include housing choice and access, especially developing a diverse, equitable, and resilient housing system that meets current and future needs and limits displacement. We have a chapter on community and quality of life, with the goal of enabling community access to opportunity as well as social, cultural, recreational, and public amenities. Our environmental quality and climate resilience chapter aims to balance urban development and environmental protection and resilience through sustainable practices and mitigation of impacts to sensitive lands. Our health and safety chapter ensure access to services and infrastructure that support health and safety. And then our economic health chapter has a goal of promoting balanced growth by supporting commercial services with improved infrastructure and connectivity while also considering climate mobility and community compatibility. And I'll just note that these are, if you're familiar with the current growth policy, these are not wildly different than our current themes that we have in there. I'll just note that the goals that we focus on and the objectives that we focus on are a lot more targeted to those that relate to land use specifically. But overall, these themes are pretty similar to what we have today. So diving into the land use strategy, this establishes our approach to achieving these goals that are outlined in that policy section. And this is done through those two key components, place types and street types. And this section was really crafted in response to Missoula's current and future conditions, including what we know about our growing population and our infrastructure capacity. And there are a few key ideas in this new land use strategy that we want to make you aware of. So the first is this transition to using place types and street types instead of land use designations, which is what we were using previously, to describe future land use in the community. And I'll dive deeper into what both of those mean in a few slides. The next ideas are around expanding opportunities for housing in both residential areas and commercial areas. And these shifts help us reach our housing need and housing capacity goals that I talked about a little earlier. As a baseline, we are required by new state mandates to allow 2 units on a typical parcel in all residential zones, so that's reflected in this strategy. And from there, we are increasing the level of housing diversity allowed in across the city, incrementally depending on the place type. And in commercial place types, there will be no limits on density in an effort to unlock the housing potential in these areas. And then another key idea is expanding opportunities for small-scale commercial in residential areas. And this is something that we consistently heard as a priority throughout almost every one of our engagement cycles. And then finally, we incorporated previous planning efforts into our land use strategy to be aligned with our operating place types and kind of how we're looking at different parts of the city. So things like our design excellence corridors, our Midtown master plan that was passed last year, I believe, our downtown master plan that was recent, North Reserve Scott Street plan, the Swatup-Kane plan. All of these were planning processes that took place after our last growth policy was adopted, and we want to make sure our kind of how we're envisioning growth in those areas matches with those plans that went through a robust community process and were adopted by the city. Oh no, I'm out of notes. All right, so place types. This is a pretty big shift and something that we really want to highlight as our our land use strategy. So why we're using it is because the way we talk about land use today is really focused on density. This is what our land use designations in our current growth policy are based on. And our goal of adopting a place types approach is to expand that conversation and how we can talk about land use in the city to be more reflective of form and urban design and how we know people visualize the built environment as things on the ground and what it looks like versus as a number. So with that, and in the next few slides, I'll kind of describe the elements that go into the place types, but we took that consideration and developed a menu of place types that range from residential, we have urban residential through rural residential, a number of commercial ones, including downtown, mixed-use districts, industrial and employment districts, civic districts, and then kind of our more natural area areas or place types. So some of the elements that go into place types and helped us make these considerations for a menu include starting kind of at the larger scale. So what does the block pattern look like? What are the streets that serve these neighborhoods? Are they grid pattern? Are they curvilinear? Are there cul-de-sacs? Zooming into a block, are there alleys? How are parcels, or what is the parcel coverage like? How much space on properties do the buildings take up? How are things situated on that block level? We do look at land use and density. That's still a piece of this. We're just expanding on it. But when we're talking about degrees of intensity, that's really signaling, is it low density, is it high density? We're referring to that through the idea of housing diversity. So what is the range of housing that is allowed in these areas or that could be built in these areas? Looking at commercial, is it small scale commercial? Is it a larger commercial corridor? So land use as a range and intensity as a range goes into this too. And then on the building scale, how are buildings and our built structures existing on properties? What is the scale of them? How tall are they? What are the setbacks like? Are they compatible with the existing buildings around them? Really, that's where we get into the form piece of looking at how things kind of fit on the ground next to one another. So we took this menu and we took these considerations of elements and assigned each parcel in the city a place type designation. And this map is hard to see, so I'm not going to make you strain your eyes. We have a printout of it, and online I'd like to point you to, we have interactive maps where you could zoom into your own property. You can see what your place type designation is. You can see what your land use designation was before to see how it's changing. And really get a sense of what this means for your neighborhood. Could you see on that map? So street types is an idea that this is kind of a new idea for the land use plan, but places and streets go hand in hand because streets are serve our places and are the networks that we use to get from place to place and are a really important part of our built environment. So this is a really great connection that we have to be able to really describe from that large network scale down to the parcel level how everything is interacting. So with that, we developed a menu of street types as well. Each place type has relatable street types, and each street type has relatable place types. So there's a relationship between the two. For example, we want to make sure that, in a residential area, we're not putting a street that's more fit for like an industrial area. They need to work together to really serve the environments that they're existing in. So these street types are, we have neighborhood scale, community scale, and then regional scale, and then an industrial. And then it's really designated from like the different types of land use. So residential, a greenway is, Glenn can correct me if I'm wrong, but more of like a bikeway as we would know it today. Mixed use areas, connector areas, and then, yeah, those industrial areas. And as far as how we made these distinctions between place types, these were a consideration of mode emphasis. So what is the main mode of transportation used for these streets? Pedestrian? Is it mostly a bike route? Is it a transit route? Is it a freight or truck route? That went into kind of that neighborhood, community, or regional designation. And then for function and priority, is the main priority of the street to move people around? Is it to move vehicles around? Is it to provide greenery or placemaking? What kind of curbside activity is taking place on these streets? And then looking at the different design elements and treatments. And the way this works is that in our plan, it gives kind of more policy level direction or recommendations of what typical treatments you would expect to see. And then the second part of this is, as we're developing our code, we'll be getting more specific about how we really regulate for those different design standards and what exactly we want to see on our streets. But these include things like speed limits, how many lanes are there, how wide are the lanes, what kind of facilities are there, what kind of parking exists on the streets, what are the intersections like, are there boulevard trees, what kind of stormwater management, all of that stuff. And one thing that we'd like to note is that street types is not necessarily a new policy idea. We have a lot of policies in the city that speak to street design or kind of street priorities. We have a complete streets plan, we have a long range transportation plan, we have bike and pedestrian facilities master plans. And really the main goal of consolidating it in this plan is to take all of those goals and policies that we have established as a city elsewhere and kind of putting it together and then organizing it by these different elements and redesignating it on a map, which we have right there. So we have a printout of this too. You can see what street is, you can kind of relate it to your place type. And our online map should also be pretty easy for comparing your place type and street type and how those interact. So I just want to conclude with some notes about, with all of this in mind and everything that's in the plan, just some notes about what function can this land use plan give us and what can it necessarily do. So the big thing is that this plan is intended to give us expectations for what our neighborhoods could look like, what could be in our neighborhoods. It doesn't necessarily tell us what will be in your neighborhoods. With that, as if you're a property owner or someone that's looking to do a project on your property, it can give you options or help you understand what options are available on your property. It is not necessarily telling you that what you need to do with your land or that you need to knock down your home and put up a duplex once we pass it or anything like that. Really important is that, and this is one of the big goals along with expectations, we want to provide predictability for what this could mean for your neighborhood, and especially what this gives us is predictability for what won't be in your neighborhood. If we don't intend a place type to be an industrial area in a residential district, you can know for sure that you will not have an industrial like factory going up next to your house. So it really kind of sets those parameters. With that, with predictability and along with not being able to dictate necessarily what happens, it does not have the ability to override market pressures and market realities. So even if something is allowed, it's really up to the market to say if it'll be there or not. And then finally, we want to provide the community with an aspirational and realistic vision for growth. With that, unfortunately, this plan cannot solve all of our community's problems, but it can get us in a step in the right direction, and there are a lot of pieces that will need to complement it to fix some of our other issues, but this is a good start. I think I will end on this slide just to recalibrate us into where we are now and what's coming up. So coming up in the winter, the next steps after this engagement cycle of over the next few weeks, we'll be continuing to talk with the community about the land use plan, hearing your thoughts on it, hearing if it captures what we need it to capture as a community. We will be taking it through that adoption process. So again, having public hearings with planning board, having city council public hearings, seeking adoption, and hopefully getting it adopted. And then following that adoption, this land use plan will really set the basis and the tone for the types of code updates that we pursue and how that code reform process goes. And then again, that'll be where we have our development code updates and then our unified development code adoption next spring. I think. Go past that blank slide. Okay. Intentionally left blank, thank you. I will say what was going to be on that slide, which is not, is on each of your tables, you have a QR code, you have our contact information, and we really, really strongly encourage you to go to the website, interact with the full plan, check out the maps that we have there, and share your comments with us. It's a lot to digest, so I don't expect you all to, have it down today, but we will be around in a lot of different places over the next few weeks and definitely want to hear your thoughts on this.